2019, in a country where millions of people had never held a bank account. Not because they didn't want one, but because the system was never designed for them. He did not just build a bank, he actually rethought the architecture of trust, figured out what works, and actually, in fact, exported this to the rest of the world. Our guest speaker, his name is Tjaart van der Walt, Dr. Tjaart van der Walt. He's the co-founder of TymeBank, now GoTymeBank, and one of the most recognized voices in the global conversation on financial inclusion. This is his story, and we want to hear all about it.
Amen.
Tjaart, delighted to have you here. Over to you.
Justin, thank you so much, and thank you for everyone attending this morning. It's a great privilege for me to share the story with you. Just a few fun facts. First one is 20 years ago, 90% of venture capital, so-called tech venture capital, was invested in US-based, United States-based companies. That changed to 70% 10 years ago, and currently it's 40%. Another interesting fun fact is a person called Eileen Lee in 20... can I perhaps just ask that everyone just mutes? I know that there's a lot of things coming in and out. But she looked at, actually as early as late as 2013, 2013, she looked at 60,000 internet and software companies in the US and found that there were only 39 that were valued $1 billion and more. So it was such a rare phenomenon, she coined it unicorns. Now, interesting is, according to PitchBook, end of April, this figure increased to 1,600 plus. End of April, 53% in the US, 21% China, 4% India, and the rest, 22-23% in other countries. So there's a technology enablement that's happening that's also creating more opportunities for people to build businesses from other places that can really become valuable and much higher impact. The principle is, I firmly believe that talent is equally distributed throughout the world, but opportunities are not. And that is also about people having access to services, and we'll get to that in a moment. I'm going to just tell you a bit of stories on, early stories, long before digital banks. For those who are my generation, might recall Bobtail dog food. I grew up in a home in Randfontein. My dad built a company up from the ground up called Nola. And in the late 70s, I was a primary school learner. They decided they're going to develop dog food. And they brought samples home to us, to our dogs, luckily. Brought it back home every night from the laboratory and made us dogs feed on it, and they developed this product. So when they launched it, he decided that our dog, this dog is called Leo, is going to be the poster figure or model for this. And so 4 or 5 years later, the same thing happened. Oh, by the way, this is for some of you guys who are also my generation. Aldebo. I recall us going out on Saturday mornings to launches in malls, parking lots, with Aldebo doing the launch of Bobtail dog food. So, a few years later, they decided they're going to develop mayonnaise. Now, at that stage, there was only one player in the market called Crosse & Blackwell. And Crosse & Blackwell learned about no lost intentions of developing a competitor. The CEO drove out to see my dad, and he said, listen, my dad was also Chad. He said, Chad, you guys are going to lose your money and you're going to hurt us. The market is just too small. He didn't listen to Cross and Blackwell CEO and launched it 1983, 84. By the way, we were also guinea pigs. Bringing back, now we had to fill out the little forms ourselves. Quite a lot of fun those days. And they launched it. But the wonderful thing of what happened here is something that I share with our team regularly, and we've shared it from the start, is that in a few years' time, Nola surpassed Cross and Blackwell as the market leader in South Africa. But what happened at the same time is that Cross and Blackwell increased their volumes more than tenfold. So in new markets, there's incredible opportunity to bake bigger cakes. One should never be afraid of competition and competitors in the market when you have to establish a new asset class. So this is just a bit of a values statement. One of the learnings of my life I wanted to share with you. I want to talk to you about three things as we tell the story of time. The first one is the notion of leadership and our understanding of leadership. Secondly, design. And third one, partnership. Let me just share with you a bit about our philosophy of leadership. So I want to state it categorically that everything begins and ends with leaders. I want to also state it and generalize that high-growth, game-changing businesses can actually not be established without being founder-led. And there will always be some exceptions, but very rare. There's a founder's mentality that's very important. It boils down to what is that? What is the ingredient of creating this very special energy that makes the impossible possible? Okay. And this is all about trust in the leaders, in the founders. Trust in three things. The first one is the trust in the intention, in the intent of the founder or founders, that they are authentic in the purpose and what they say this business, what they want to achieve with this business. The second one is their ability to execute. Trust of the team in the ability of the leaders to execute. And the third one is a real trust in the care of the leaders, of the founders, in the personal and professional growth of the team, right? And of the individuals in the team. So these things are there. You know what's interesting? Then this very special type of energy gets unlocked. This is energy that creates, it's this inspirational culture that you create that is very unfriendly to politics and mediocrity. No room for politics and mediocrity, only for excellence. And it's in a place where excellent people can flourish. And you can only build game changers and high growth businesses with excellent people. And as far as I'm concerned, smaller teams are really very capable. So how does one measure this? As far as I'm concerned, it's a very simple measure, one of the measures. If the leaders, and you can potentially also apply this in your own environment, if the leaders need power from above, from the shareholders, from the board, to get stuff going, that's a transactional environment. And you just cannot create this special type of energy that I'm talking about. If the power comes from below, in other words, where the leaders or the founders are validated by their peers and by the people in the team. In other words, there's this type of special trust and validation. Then that's an inspirational organization that can go places, right? So that's a very important gauge for me. Switch over to design. A house. People ask, what is the most important thing in a house? People will respond, and I'll be the first one to also respond that way. It's the foundation. It's actually the plan. So if the plan is proper, then one can build a very, very interesting house with great flow and very livable and so on and so forth. We put a lot of energy and thought into the design. In other words, the design principles of what we try to do. When Koen Jonker, my co-founder, and I shook hands in April 2011 to say we're going to do this, we're going to build a multi-country digital bank for emerging markets. He came from an institutional corporate background, a strong institutional knowledge. I came from a lean startup environment where I've built previous businesses.
Excuse me, Jack. If you're sharing anything on this slideshow, it's back to your first slide. All we see is the journey.
This is just a placeholder. I'm telling a story.
Okay, great.
Okay.
I'll let everyone in the chat know. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So sorry. I should have said, just be patient. I'll show you the graphs just now. So what we from the first moment said is, let's combine the institutional knowledge and the lean startup in knowledge and experience, because if you can, we believe in doing so, we can create a game changer. We can create a bank that is the lowest cost to serve bank. In other words, and that can be accessible for all, and that can be a bank where today we are profitably banking the poorest person in the country, being a SRD grant holder receiving 370 Rand a month. Payback within 12 to 18 months for us. No other bank in South Africa, and I think there's only 1 or 2 banks in China that we know of that can actually do this profitably. So, and it was all about design. And I can go through the design principles, but we haven't got time for that. That's a story for another day. And then what we also said is, if we want to do this in a capital, a shallow environment like South Africa, we must do partnerships. If we want to go build a global business, we have to do partnership, in partnership with people, with retailers, with capital providers, with people in those countries who we can trust and we share the same values. And in partnerships, there are 3 things. The first one is you have to default to a position of trust. And I think it's very important actually to default always to a position of trust, not to be distrusting, because if you are distrusting, your world is just so small. And the other, without being naive, the other thing is it must strengthen the core of the businesses of the partner. It should not be an experiment on the side. And the third one is leave money on the table. So many people say, yes, I've done a brilliant deal, But if that deal doesn't sustain for both parties and both partners, and where both partners can grow bigger, then that thing cannot sustain. And the partner DNA is so important also for building a high growth, game-changing business for us. So let me go into the story. Now, this is Koen Jonker and myself. We met each other in 1989 as student leaders. He was at University of Free State and I was at Stellenbosch University, and we became big mates from day one. This is in 1999, hiking the Fish River Canyon in Namibia with our wives. And the first partnership is always the partnership between the founders. I want to emphasize that. And this partnership, we differ a lot, by the way, and we disagree, but we always trust each other's intentions. So important. So in 2000s, while I was building an AI software business, industrial software business with then previous partners of mine being old university friends. By the way, I specialized in the early 90s in AI, in artificial intelligence, in engineering. And we built an AI software business in the 2000s. While I was doing this, Koen was, among others, the managing partner of Edward Nathan. And he read a book by, The Mystery of Capital by the Peruvian economist Hernando de Soto. And he was just blown away by this notion of inclusion. What is the difference between the haves and the have-nots? How do you build multi-generational wealth? What is the difference between people? Again, talent is equally distributed, opportunities are not. And it boils down to having access to data of people, for people to be able to come into the formal environment where the institutional knowledge about them can be enhanced. And then you can build product and you can offer them and they can get access to capital and so on and so forth, and start to build multi-generational wealth. So he decides going to make a career of it, joined Standard Bank to build Time 0.1 within Standard Bank, inclusive banking. Him and his team became known as a cult within Standard Bank. Sim Sabalala is quoted on this, and they tried to make it very difficult for Koen. He reported to the most, the most rigorous senior executive in Standard Bank. And during that time, I sold my previous business with my partners then to General Electric. And the time was right. I said to Koen, listen, I mean, I can see that you've got tears in your eyes and sweat on your forehead. I'll help you. Why don't you do this outside of Standard Bank, and I'll help you do that. And we shook hands on the 29th of April 2011. Again, partnerships. We partnered with Deloitte. We wanted to have access to a brand and to skill to build this. And the interesting, more or less at the same time, David Velez of Nubank launched Nubank, started the project of Nubank. He came from Sequoia. Sequoia understood how to develop, how to invest in deep J-curve businesses and how to really support founders, right? In a non-command control environment, but where they realized our point is to empower the founders on these journeys. And he could start very, very clean. We had to box smarter because we didn't have access to that capital. And so we established a banking as a service business first, where we partnered also with MTN and built them a bank instance, and in partnership with Deloitte. Deloitte couldn't continue with the project, and then MTN said they will take it over, and they couldn't take it over, and so Koen and I basically spun the team and the business out of Deloitte and MTN, and that was in July 2012. And that's where the Time business was founded. Koen had to sell all his properties that he built up over 10, 15 years, and I had to put 60-70% of the money in that I took off the table with a GE sale of a previous business. And all our team members decided they're going to join us, and they supported us on this journey. We started to build this business. By the way, I just also want to say, MTN didn't want to continue, but then they came back and said they want a bank. And I want to show you another data point. Okay. For 3 to 4 weeks in October, November 2012, this is Koen and myself actually taking naps in the 14th Avenue offices of MTN throughout the night. We literally went home every second or third day to take a shower. We negotiated through the nights with the MTN people. They had separate teams working us. And I can tell you, this is something that I don't know whether it's possible to put this energy in if you're not the founder with this type of vision. If you're a mercenary, it's very, very difficult to find this energy. So on the 22nd of November, 2012, we switched on a bank for MTN. Okay, it was called mobile money, but that was a bank account. More or less the same time. Okay, this is just a nice picture. That was our first brand of time with my 3 youngest children, and this was our first time machine in our factory in Johannesburg South. This is kiosk version 1. For you who have seen some of our kiosks, how they developed over time, but at the same time of doing the deal with MTN, I approached my brother's business in Namibia called Point Break, and we shook hands and we said, right, let's build a full licensed bank on a 50-50 partnership for Namibia. And this was I just bought this old house in Linwood, Pretoria, brought some of the core tech architects in, and this was actually the first session where we started designing eBank for Namibia. 2 years later, in October 2014, we launched eBank in Namibia, and this was on that wonderful day. Some of the people here, it's my brother and some of his partners of Point Break, and one of the partners there is the lady in the middle is called Monica Gainkos. She was the first lady of Namibia later on, and is very much involved as a leader figure in the United Nations programs around enhancement of women and children rights. And she was our first chair of the bank in Namibia. During that same time, we were approached by Commonwealth Bank Australia. And they said they want to buy us to do 2 things. The one is let's build a bank in South Africa's own license. And also let's build digital banks for them in their Southeast Asian markets. And we thought that was a great deal. So what we now could do is actually go in and build banks in 7 emerging markets. So we could do this deal and actually fulfill our destiny, or our purpose in creating a digital bank for emerging markets. It was a very difficult time for the team. This is part of a journey. By the way, this is also just blank for a reason. The short and long of it is we got a lot from Commonwealth Bank. Okay, we got the licensing in South Africa. It's the first license in 18 years given to new full commercial license. We got access to the Southeast Asian markets and fell in love with the Southeast Asian markets. We started to build a team in Ho Chi Minh City, and another thing that we got from Commonwealth Bank is when we got the opportunity to buy the business back end of 2018, we got a hell of a big assessed loss on the balance sheet. So for a long time, we're going to chip away on that assessed loss. Learnings from that environment, and I want to leave this with you as well. Again, generalizing. A command control environment, if you've established a mindset of command and control, it's very difficult for people over time to get rid of that. So what they did is they bought us for a very specific reason. But 3-4 months into the journey, they got uncomfortable with us wanting to do things for at $1 instead of $20. So there was this type of mismatch. And I only later on learned, and I'm oversimplifying it, only later on realized that for middle managers who've got C-suite aspirations, they want to show that they can manage big budgets with many people. That counts in their favor. In an entrepreneurial, inspirational environment, where you want to build game changers, you want to demonstrate, and you want to do it, not to demonstrate, but to do it, to establish something special. You want to do it you want to do a lot with as few as possible people with as low as possible budgets. It's a completely different thing. Again, this thing about power from the top and power from below. So we partner with corporates, but it is difficult to partner with people, with businesses that has got that type of DNA in them. But it is our responsibility as founders and entrepreneurs to manage that complexity. We take it full on the chin. In the case of CBA, when we got the opportunity to buy back Patrice Motsepe and the ARC team, they supported us. I wanted to share a quick story about Patrice Motsepe. He was actually advised by his investor committee, being a few very experienced businessmen sitting around the table, not to do the deal because there's no place for another bank in South Africa and banking is too expensive, etc., with those arguments. In the end, Patrice stood up, actually complimented his whole investment committee. By the way, Johan van Zyl and Charmaine Parachi, they supported the deal. They were driving this, but the 10, 12 other people not. And stood up, thanked them for their wisdom, and then took the papers and signed. And if that didn't happen, we might have bought back the intellectual property, Kuno and myself, with our team and established something outside of South Africa. But we would not have had Time Bank South Africa because that shareholder of reference, being Patrice Motsepe, was needed by the Reserve Bank to secure the bank license. So I will always honor Patrice Motsepe for that moment. This is Hong Kong. Just after we bought back the business, early 2019, with a little shared office space with our New Time brand then. And we, in 2019, designed a bank for Egypt because of our design principles, one being that everything, the whole tech stack, must run off the AWS cloud. We're an AWS cloud, shop. If the moment when you break that, you build different banks and you start to break your one of the key design principles. Egypt government and regulator didn't want to allow us to do that. They want to have on-prem and in-country systems. And after we've done all the hard work in Egypt to launch another bank in Egypt, we had to walk away from that. Just another little fact. So, April 2020. April 2020 was a very interesting period. We needed 750 million rand. We did a capital raise. We were oversubscribed. The raise was bound to close on the 15th of April of 2020. We all know what happened with the lockdowns, and it fell through. So again, Kuno and myself, together with ARC, had to foot the bill. We also had some of our family and friends, investors who stuck to their word, and I will never, with good reason, some people just couldn't continue. They had to back their own businesses in those uncertain times. But we had to do that, and then also in that period of lockdowns, we learned about the Philippines issuing digital bank licenses, started to contact Lance Gokong of the different family conglomerates in the Philippines to look at partnerships, and then struck a chord with the Gokongwe family. Now, what's interesting here is that they called, they made a reference call, and we made the same reference call to some of our friends in the office of Rothschilds in London, both customers, and both said what the Rothschilds basically said is, you guys have got the same values. You can trust one another. So important. What happened is, during COVID, we applied for a bank license. We negotiated the commercial partnership between us. We set the distribution channels in place. We built the technology stack. And the first time we met the Gokongwe family face to face was 3 weeks before the public launch of GoTyme Bank in the Philippines. The same happened. Okay, this is, by the way, the launch of GoTyme Bank in Manila. Nate Clark, one of our exceptional younger next generation of leaders, who actually led this project for us. He's still the CEO of GoTyme Bank in the Philippines and doing an exceptional job there. That's in the offices, preparing for the launch. And this is with the GoCongwe family. One evening we went out through partnership. Another story about partnerships. In 2023, we learned that David Velez of Nubank is going to be at an Endeavor event in New York, December 2023. So we decided, I basically knew the president of Endeavor very well, Adrian Garcia Ranios, and gave him a call and asked him whether he would be prepared to introduce us. And we had a few email exchanges, David and myself, beforehand to prepare for a meeting. Now, this is on the 52nd floor of the, a building in Liberty Street in the financial district of New York, where we actually met David face to face for the first time. Just a stand-up meeting. He was very busy. We didn't engage in that time. But the short and long of it is 12 months later, December 2024, Nubank was became the lead investor in our Series D capital raise of $250 million. And this is a match made in heaven, because this is founder-led. It's a huge organization. They trade at 60 to 70 billion US dollar on the New York Stock Exchange. They are arguably the leading digital bank with a cost to serve, or the efficiency ratio of between around about 18% now. And what we find is that because of this founder-led business, they understand how to back founders and the importance of this founder mindset, and to really back it, not to control. Because the moment when you control, you have to put your so-called professional investors, managers in to come and manage it, and then it becomes transactional. So it was very important for Kuno and myself over time to establish or to broaden our capital, our cap table as well, in order to make sure that we've got, we've got this type of investor group on our cap table. Great. So decision was made a couple of years ago to leverage the GoTyme Bank brand better, because we felt it's much more sticky, and also to simplify the business and to make sure it actually runs as a single business with a single tech stack through all our installations in countries. And we actually last week, Thursday, had our public launch of the GoTyme Bank brand. Okay, and you will see a lot coming out in South Africa. So in the group, we rebranding, as well as the bank in South Africa. We are rebranding to GoTyme Bank, leveraging off our experience, our great experience of the brand in the Philippines. This is a very special person to me. Cheslin Jacobs, he's the new CEO of our bank in South Africa, cutting the ribbon. And this, to me, is actually one of the things I'm going to show in other pictures. It gives me the greatest joy to see how our young people in the organizations really blossomed and are coming to full fruition now as leaders. So Cheslin joined us a few months into the project. He was 26 years old. He's just 41 now. Perfect age to be a CEO of a bank, as far as I'm concerned. And Lucia Malapane started as a call center agent, and she's now a head of brand in a bank in South Africa. And this is just their team, basically the infield team at where they actually cut that ribbon and in Rosebank Mall opened the stand-up hub of GoTown Bank kiosks. Just a bit of a quick overview. We are so fortunate to be able to serve currently almost 23 million account holders throughout the world, going for 13 million now in South Africa and almost 10 million in the Philippines. We're growing at about 400,000 new account holders every month between these two markets. Headquartered in Singapore, Tech Hub, Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, the two banks, licensed bank in South Africa and the Philippines. And we also have operations, lending operations in Hong Kong, in Indonesia as well, and looking at a few other marketplaces as well. This is just a quick overview. Justin, over to you.
Thank you so much for those insights and the share there, Chad. Chad, I'm really keen to maybe, just to get into this next phase of our discussion and Q&A. You spoke about, the growth and, there's this thing that we refer to in our digital enterprise management class MBA on, phygital strategy, right? So a mix of the physical as well as the digital. Now, we talk about digital first like that is the finish line. We look at what you're doing in the Philippines. It is a fully digital bank. But somehow you kept the physical touch point here in South Africa. Was that a strategic bet with you having the kiosk and you sharing that slide with the Time kiosk? Or did the market specifically tell you something that you weren't quite expecting? So maybe just take us through that thinking.
Yeah, so what is important in emerging markets is this, to bridge the digital divide. Now, we can see how people are becoming more and more digital by the day. Okay, but when we started and we launched, there was a much bigger digital divide, and still today, some people want to have assistance. So remember, these kiosks are actually manned by what we call ambassadors that can help people on the kiosks. 1. 2, okay, so there's 2 ways of onboarding. The one is facial recognition on the phone, and the other one is at the kiosk. And some people prefer the kiosk over the phone. What's great about the kiosk as well is it issues cards, personalized debit cards. So people can go to any kiosk anytime during retail hours and actually get access to their cards or do card replacements and so on. So that was important for us. But the most important thing is this whole thing in order to bridge the digital divide, we felt it is very important to enhance accessibility and inclusion of people, to have this presence.
So thanks for that, Chad. So just looking at, let's look at the kiosks. I think a phenomenal experience, walking into TFG and then taking my son through the whole experience of actually onboarding them and getting a personalized cards. And that's something like under 5 minutes, right? And, I just want to know, and take me through this, what's your views and your opinions on the regulator? We look at the South African Reserve Bank, Prudential Authority, PASA, and from your perspective, is it a barrier or is it an enabler? Just securing a banking license, the whole life cycle of the barriers to entry is so high. And maybe just share with us, how did regulation actually shape the business? And what did you wish new entrants would actually, what would they have, should they understand before they actually start this journey of opening a bank?
Okay, the first
Sorry,
question.
Chad, can I just interrupt? Before you answer, the audience actually asked if you can stop sharing your screen. They would like to see you and Justin.
Good.
Okay.
Good.
Thank you.
Yeah, so barrier or enabler?
Is this better?
Yes.
Much better.
Okay. Wonderful. Oops. Okay, so we decided to play in the regulated environment, okay, in the full bank regulated environment. During that time when people were saying, Bill Gates and the likes, banks are dead, long live banks, you know, that type of thing, and fintechs are going to take over and so on. There's a very important role for banks to play. And although we believe that GoTyme Bank can become an absolutely loved bank, okay, in South Africa, Philippines, and beyond. In many instances, people still don't like banks, but they trust banks, okay? And the reason why they trust banks is because of the regulated environment, because it's highly regulated. So we've got incredible respect for the regulatory environment, one. Two, we work with the regulator to improve regulation, to enable, for example, more people to have access. In both South Africa as well as the Philippines, we were leading the process with the regulator to develop regulation where cloud-based banking, for example, can be accepted. And now all the banks can benefit from that. One. Two, if there's something like wet signatures still accepted, we have to have digital onboarding and a biometric verification, for example. So many people say, I've got an ambition, and they are fintechs, and say, okay, we want to become, the next step is to become a bank. You know how long it took TymeBank South Africa to actually start to benefit from the bank license because of the cost of regulation, and because of capital adequacy requirements, and because of the cost of passive capital on the balance sheet. You know, because of these regulations. So one must understand what you're in for, one, and two, also you have to be able to include in your team as core team members, experienced bankers around things like compliance. People who are not necessarily used to this high growth, high speed moving entrepreneurial environment. And you have to include that and adapt your culture to make those guys a core part of your team with great respect because of the great respect for regulators and recognizing the importance of these guys in banking. Okay. So I've now said a few things. The one is, banking is expensive from a regulatory perspective. You have to understand that cost before you venture into applying for a bank license. It is not impossible. We went from the start to say we're going to do mass retail banking. But it took us 3, 4, 5 years before the bank license actually started to become profitable for us. And now, you know, the cost of capital is just fantastic for us. That's the benefit, but you had to get through that break, to that, you know, cross point.
Now, speaking about cross points, Chad, and I'll open up to the audience also to ask if there are any questions there, Jira. But speaking about, you know, going through this whole cycle, and Chad, it's like you went through all these near-death experiences along the way, right? And it seems like each and every time, you know, partnerships came up as a key element. I mean, I think, you know, foundationally, I hear trust, I hear partnerships as a key growth architecture. Now, just looking at, you mentioned Patrice Motsepe, you mentioned David Valles, the relationship with TFG, Pick n Pay, even the ZCC, and now even Sanlam. I see we have a few Sanlam members here today.
Very important.
Each partnership is doing something completely different. There's reach, there's access, there's trust, there's distribution. How do you decide which partnership is very strategic for the GoTyme brand And which ones are just complete deals? Or is there even a difference?
No, I think, something like a Sanlam deal is very strategic for us. That's why we have a JV on unsecured lending, for example. And why it's so strategic for us also is because it will open up new corridors quicker for us to certain market segments that we've been struggling to get to. I believe also that, however, with our rebranding, being a more aspirational brand, that we will get there, but it will just be greatly accelerated by the Sanlam partnership. Two is, by partnering with Sanlam, we get a 25-year-old consumer lending book that significantly reduces our capital requirements, capital adequacy requirements on lending, for example. 1 and 2, where we can benefit from that experience. Okay. So that's a classic example of a great partnership. Listen, it's not easy because remember, the GoTyme Bank culture and the Sanlam culture are two different cultures. However, this thing is within Sanlam, we know, from a board and at the CEO level, driven like mad. It's a great priority for us, for them, and that's why it's going to work, I believe. There are certain partnerships, we say partnerships are actually more transactional, and that's why you sometimes have to stop these things and get out. I'm not going to unpack names and so on, but I mean, from time to time, if something doesn't work for both parties, stop it. MTN we thought was going to be a great partnership in the early days, but they couldn't partner. And that's why I think it didn't work out in the end, because they didn't have that partnership culture at that point in time with the teams that we were working with, a bit distrusting and so on. What are these guys doing? They're always asking, where are we outsmarting them? To be open about that. And I just say, the mindset of partnership is you have to default to trust as a start. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Otherwise, you want to negotiate the best deal for you out of the partnership instead of what's good for the partnership. Okay. Justin, I don't know whether that answers your question.
Yes, no, excellent. Thanks for those insights. I'm just going to check in with Ajira. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Yes, we do. We have quite a few. I'll start with the first one.
Let me pause for now and let's hand over.
Thank you. So the first one's from Raymond. How did you approach finding the right people as you were scaling, especially when you were focused on building the partnerships while expanding the business?
Arguably the most important part of the business. But I want to answer it again at the philosophical level. Yes, you look for people, but remember those people look for you as well. So the culture must be there. And what we always say is we are a very unfriendly employer to politicians, which equals mediocrity, and a very friendly employer for excellence. And then we focus on the development of people. And people must know that and must feel it. And then people join us. At the same time, sometimes people come in, especially in the early days, they are excellent people, but they became used to a very structured environment. Let's say there's HR processes working for them. And now suddenly, I recall in the early days, one guy walking to my office and said, "Chart, where's our HR manager?" And with my apologies to some of you here, as I looked around and say, "I don't know, God, I don't know." We haven't gotten there. So, and those types of people actually left back into the big banks. But later on, now we are in much more structured environment and so on. I can share with you many of these stories, but the short and long of it is culture attracts the right talent. That's why you have to be so meticulous around the development of your people, your care for their growth, your your looking, I continuously ask myself, try to make sure my intent is true, you know, and every leader in our business must say, is our intent true? Things like, can I really find joy out of the achievement of my peers, of my superiors, of people working with me, for me, okay? Those are important cultural things. Because if you can do that, it's not a competition. It's a huge collaboration that enhances this, establishes this type of energy where people love to work that are excellent. People hate to work if they are politicians because they're not going to be heard.
Thanks, Chad. Ajira, I'm just going to group some of the questions together because there's some technology questions and there's some. So maybe there's two questions here around. Chad, would seem that affordability and access to your product is a key feature to ensure access. This would be quite important part of the tech design. What other deliberate features have you built to enable resilience and growth for your customers? And then there's another question around, just looking at your deployment. There's some challenges or constraints in terms of infrastructure in the townships or the rural areas. And how have you actually addressed that so that you can create broad financial inclusion?
Okay, so the interesting thing is what's happening currently in the world is that it's like software development. It is, the cost is going to zero, right? Technology itself follows the same type of trend. And technology is becoming more and more accessible. So the first thing is we have to make sure that we are disrupting ourselves. That our architecture is such that we can actually replace our total stack every 5 to 7 years. So although technology is going down, there's one very important thing that will never, that's so key, and that is the architecture of that technology. Will always be a competitive advantage. So you must be able to depreciate your technology. I mean, one of the things is don't over-capitalize. You know, in listed companies, they want to capitalize technology, and then that becomes an institutional barrier for people not to, because what CFO is going to, and CEO are going to miss out on their bonuses for writing off a few billion rand off the balance sheet in 1 year. So short and long of it is, technology architecture, what we are doing is we absolutely focused on that to enable any type of currency and to enhance the speed of product development. Okay. We've got wonderful products, processes actually led by a visionary CIO I call Dieter Botha, who's leading this whole project for us. So as an enabler for inclusion, the cost to serve is hugely important. That's the first one. If you can't keep your cost to serve down and you start to become bloated, okay, then, and you can't profitably bank a person with 300 rand a month, then at some stage someone will say, listen, we're losing money, I mean, listen, this is not a charity, this is a business with shareholders and so on, okay?
Yeah.
And that's a very important part of our DNA. We want to make available the lowest cost bank account in countries to people who have 300 rand a month, okay?
No, great. So I think most of our students are chuckling now in our digital enterprise management class, because that was the theme of this week, disrupting your business model. So just speaking to the technology, we have a question here from Rodney in terms of how mature was the platform, your technological platform, when the first major partnerships were signed? And early on, was the real focus on proving the business model, distribution strategy, and execution capability, with the platform evolving afterwards? So was it almost, did you come up with that initial proof of concept or minimum viable product? It worked, and then eventually you started adding additional features, or was it like a big bang approach?
So multiple iterations. The first thing, by the way, what we said is distribution first, then comes technology. So our distribution strategy from day one, when we walked into Deloitte in September 2011, the first thing was to sell a project to MTN. The second thing was to start to talk to retailers, mass retailers. Okay. We only 3 or 4 months into the design project started to put together our technology team and start to develop. And then we developed fast because we knew what we wanted to do. Now that was in 2011-12. Cloud was not there, right? And we had to build on-prem. 1. 2, regulation didn't allow cloud. So those stacks, okay, so we developed for MTN, we developed completely separate new generation stack for eBank, right? Because our whole process evolved. And then CBA came in and they decided, no, nothing of these things are working. They're going to do a new stack and brought their own architects in. Okay, and then we bought it back. And we had to start, if I may say so, in many respects, a clunky bank system that we launched in February 2019. And we just said we have to get into the air with a heated guided missile. Okay. In other words, where we get in, then we launch and we fire and then we aim. Ready, fire, and not ready, aim, fire. We have to be in the air. And we actually then, with GoTime Bank, developed a new stack because of the clunkiness of the South African stack. And now, the past 2 years, we went through a huge investment, very difficult, to actually put everything on a single platform within cloud, leveraging off the best that we've learned. So it's been a very difficult journey, technologically wise. You know, and all kudos to the team who took all the hits. And it actually also held back product launches and so on, because we just believe it's fundamentally so important to actually get onto a single stack and to make sure that we've got this architecture that is replaceable, easy, without big problems and cost.
Love it. I love that. Ready, fire, aim.
Yeah.
So grand final question here. It's Africa Month, and it asks us really, you know, what do we think about and what this continent can actually offer to the world, not just what it needs, right? So GoTime Bank is, you know, the South African model now running in the Philippines and the world. What do you believe Africa genuinely exports to the global finance that nobody else can?
Listen, I mean, if it comes to money transfer, it's been a leader, isn't it? If it comes to payment systems, we are leaders as Africans, you know, from a continent perspective. A lot of learnings have come from here. We are absolutely leaders. If it comes to leadership, we are lacking very far behind. To the predictability of regulation, we are lacking very far behind. I'm not talking about South Africa now. Leadership, yes, but that's a different story, because we could have grown significantly more and we would have been in a much better place. Okay, and we must be open and frank about this. And this is not talking politics, but socioeconomics. Okay, so we've got export products, you know, but leadership in Africa must start to sort themselves out. Without that, you know, economist will had an interesting article about 6, 7, 8 months ago, where they showed this since 1995, GDP per capita, how it just stayed flat in Africa, went up in Latin America, went up in Southeast Asia. We've got the people. The talent is equally distributed. Opportunities not, but we are our own biggest enemies. and we have to sort that out, I believe.
Again, Char, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your insights, for you really inspiring us on what responsible leadership is all about, being a phenomenal alumnus of the university. May you continue just to go out and make a real impact from a financial inclusion at scale, impacting the globe. And we continuously will be inspired, and we're right behind you. So thank you so much, Chad, for your engagement. Really inspirational. Thank you.
Baie dankie. Thank you so much, Justin, and the University of Stellenbosch Business School. You guys are very close to my heart as being an alumni of the university. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Chad van der Walt. Much appreciated.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
everyone.
Stellenbosch Business School University and our ecosystem. There will be more of these kinds of events. So stay tuned. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks,
Chad.
everyone.